Welcome to the Wealth Dialogue. I'm Emily.
And I'm Jack. So have you noticed it? That feeling that life is just persistently more expensive lately.
Oh, definitely.
And not because of some big dramatic event you can point to. We're not talking about a 2008-style financial collapse or some massive tax hike.
No, it's much more subtle than that.
It is. It's just this insidious sense that you're perpetually falling behind. No big announcement, no warning, just less money left at the end of the month.
Even with the same job, the same lifestyle.
Exactly.
And that anxiety you're describing, it's incredibly widespread. Our sources confirm it's rooted in a very real phenomenon.
Okay.
This shift didn't happen like a visible explosion. It happened through what we're calling the quiet transformation.
The quiet transformation. I like that.
We're basically analyzing how the cost of living crept up over years, and in doing so, quietly changed financial reality for so many people. It's an invisible but constant pressure.
Invisible pressure, that's the perfect phrase for it. And that's our mission in this deep dive, right?
Yes.
To unpack the sources describing this transformation.
Exactly. We want to turn that pervasive anxiety into some actionable understanding.
But you can walk away knowing the precise economic mechanisms that are squeezing your budget.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's unpack this and jump right into the structure of this creeping crisis.
Right. So we have to start with the nature of the change itself. The key word really is quietly.
The insidious quality comes from how gradual it was.
Yes. If prices had, say, doubled in a single quarter, the public outcry and the policy response would have been immediate and massive. But the sources all emphasize that prices didn't explode. They crept up.
And what makes that creep so effective and, well, so damaging in the long term?
It basically exploits a psychological blind spot. We're wired to register sudden, dramatic changes, the flood, not the erosion.
Yeah.
So if your rent goes up by 3% this year, and your grocery bill goes up by 4%, but in tiny increments over 12 months, your brain just dismisses it.
It's just market noise.
It's just noise. It's too small to trigger an alarm bell on a Tuesday morning. But the data shows that the cumulative impact of those small, consistent increases over 5 years is, well, it's vastly more significant than any single price shock.
That makes perfect sense. You adapt to the new price of milk or the slightly higher electric bill, and you don't even register the total impact until, you sit down and look at your annual spending versus 5 years ago.
And that's why it's so stressful. The sources point out that this creeping change makes people question their own competence.
Because they can't see the enemy.
Exactly. They know their financial stability is getting worse, but because the changes were invisible, they can't pinpoint the cause. So they look inward and assume they've mismanaged things.
When really we need to be looking outward at the structural pressures.
That's the shift we need to make.
Okay, so that brings us right to the structural question. What specific costs changed the most? If we're looking for that pressure, where do the sources say the heaviest weight is falling?
And this is where that term quiet transformation really earns its name. The heavy lifting isn't being done by, optional luxury goods.
Right.
It's falling squarely on the essentials, the basics.
Yeah.
The sources identify 4 major categories that have seen inflation significantly higher than the baseline rate: housing, food, transportation, and utilities.
The absolute core costs of existing.
The fixed or semi-fixed costs of basic human existence, yes.
Let's drill down on that. Why is it so much more painful when those specific categories go up versus, say, the cost of a new television?
It all comes down to something called inelastic demand.
Meaning you can't really opt out.
You can't. You can easily put off buying a new TV if the price goes up. You can't put off buying groceries or paying your rent.
So there's no flexibility.
Almost zero. So when those costs rise, the budget for everything else, savings, childcare, education, any discretionary spending, it gets ruthlessly squeezed as a direct result.
So it's a domino effect that starts with the non-negotiables. If my mandatory spending goes up by $300 a month, that $300 has to come from somewhere.
It does. It gets subtracted from your ability to save or invest or handle an unexpected car repair.
So it's not about losing the luxury fund. It's about the essentials, crowding out your margin of safety.
Precisely. And this crowding out effect is what really confuses people when they look at their paychecks. Many people will look at their pay stubs and think, wait, I didn't lose income. I even got a small raise last year.
But the reality is that their money lost power. That's the real economic concept here, isn't it? The silent erosion of purchasing parity.
Yes, this is where we shift from just a feeling to the actual analysis.
Yeah.
Purchasing parity is just the buying power of your dollar.
Okay.
And while overall national wages may have sort of kept pace with a broad measure of inflation, like the core CPI.
The big number you see on the news.
Right. But our sources show they did not keep pace with essential cost inflation. Let's say 5 years ago, it took you 80 hours of work to pay for your rent, car payment, and groceries for the month.
Hmm.
Today, because of the high inflation in those specific sectors, that same basket of goods might require 100 hours of work, even if your hourly wage technically went up.
So you feel like you're running harder just to stay in the same place.
Exactly. Your income level is the same, but the unavoidable cost of the basics rose disproportionately. The psychological gap is profound. You're not technically earning less, but your lived experience is one of financial decay.
But I can still hear the counter-argument.
Yeah.
Maybe they just need to budget better. Stop buying that $5 coffee.
Yeah.
What do the sources say to that? Why isn't this just a failure of personal budgeting?
That's a crucial point, and the sources are quite firm on this. While financial discipline always matters, of course, the structural nature of this problem means the solution isn't just about cutting lattes.
It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. The sources explicitly state that people blame themselves unfairly because they're focusing on the small discretionary purchases while the real damage is happening at the foundation: housing, mandatory insurance, utilities.
So we need to make a really clear distinction between the cost of existing and lifestyle spending.
That distinction is paramount. Lifestyle spending is discretionary. It's the vacation, the new clothes, the streaming services.
The fun stuff.
The fun stuff, yes. The cost of existing, however, is the foundational overhead of life: rent, mortgage, insurance, reliable transport, basic food. And our deep dive shows most people didn't suddenly inflate their lifestyle. The overhead of life just went up and consumed their financial cushion.
And this structural shift is why the emotional toll is so immense. When the enemy is invisible, the stress is just amplified.
That's the core tragedy of it. Money stress feels so much heavier when the cause is uncertain, when you feel like you're doing everything right, you have a good job, you cook at home, you don't splurge, but you're still falling behind.
The anxiety just turns into personal guilt, a sense of failure.
It does, and the absence of a single visible culprit makes that internal pressure far, far worse.
Okay, to make this less abstract, let's talk about that anecdote from the sources about the couple who were struggling with this. How did their experience illustrate this quiet transformation?
It's a perfect example. The sources documented this case of a dual-income couple, both educated professionals who were just deeply frustrated.
They're doing everything right.
Hitting all the traditional markers of success, stable jobs, decent salaries, but they constantly felt like they were failing. And they internalized this, believing they were just bad with money, that they lacked discipline.
So I imagine they were cutting back on discretionary spending like crazy, thinking that's where the problem was.
They were. Their whole mindset was focused on restriction, but it wasn't working. Finally, they sat down to review their finances analytically, and they did something we're about to recommend. They separated their mandatory costs from their optional fun money.
And what did the data show? Was it the lattes after all?
Not even close. Their general spending habits were completely reasonable. No expensive cars, no lavish trips. The crushing realization was that their core existence costs had risen dramatically and quietly over the last 4 years.
So things like rent, insurance.
Their rent renewal, their health insurance premiums, and the cumulative incremental increase in their weekly grocery bill. All that had ballooned to consume an extra 15% of their net income.
Wow. So their lifestyle didn't change, but the price of simply maintaining that life did.
Exactly. The foundational cost of existing had silently increased, which effectively gave them a massive, invisible pay cut.
And understanding of that must have been a huge mindset shift.
It was profound. They realized they weren't dealing with a personal lack of discipline, but with structural economic pressure. That knowledge moved them past the guilt and allowed them to finally formulate a real strategy.
That is such a valuable takeaway. It changes the focus from how can I cut my tiny entertainment budget to the much more strategic question of how do I defend my income against the rising cost of my foundational life overhead?
That's the pivot.
Okay, so what does this mean for our listener who's ready to shift from diagnosis to action? Let's get into the 6 realistic steps for regaining control.
And the shift is entirely away from restriction, which is fighting the small battles, to strategic control, which is managing the structural pressures. The sources give us 6 practical steps.
Let's walk through them because this is about giving tangible control back to you, the listener. What's number 1?
First, and arguably the most important, is to track essentials separately from lifestyle spending. You have to establish two clear buckets.
You can actually measure the creep.
Precisely. You need to see exactly how much the overhead of existing is rising compared to your fund money. If you track them together, a rising rent payment gets hidden by the fact you saved money on a jacket during a sale. You have to isolate the true cost driver.
That makes the enemy visible. Okay, what about those small repetitive costs?
That brings us to step 2. Review subscriptions yearly, not monthly. Most of us sign up for streaming services, apps, whatever, and then never think about them again.
The set it and forget it trap.
Exactly. Reviewing these recurring costs once a year forces you to confront the accumulated total. You have to decide if that service is really worth it or if it's just a silent $100 a year anchor on your budget.
I like that. All right, step 3 is about being proactive.
Yes. Lock fixed costs when possible. The sources really emphasize this. Since the problem is rising costs, the strategy is to slow the velocity of those increases.
So you're trying to build a firewall.
You're building a firewall. If you can get a longer-term lease, lock in a utility rate, or sign a multi-year agreement on a service, you are temporarily hedging against the next round of quiet price hikes. You trade some flexibility for stability.
And stability is key. That brings us to savings, right?
Yeah.
What about building a buffer?
That's step 4. Build a small buffer, even if progress is slow. The goal here is not instant wealth, it's resilience.
So if your mandatory costs jump by $50 next month,
A small buffer, even just $1,000, means you absorb that hit without resorting to high-interest debt. Slow progress is still a strategic win because it protects you from the emotional and financial spiral of an unexpected bill.
okay, and since wage erosion is the core problem, step 5 has to be about income.
That's right. Focus on income stability, not perfection. In a high-cost environment, increasing your earning potential is a powerful defensive measure. This could mean prioritizing reliable raises, proactively developing new skills, or even securing a stable second stream of income,
You're fighting structural costs with structural income solutions.
instead of just cutting coupons. It's a much more powerful approach.
And finally, the last step addresses that huge emotional piece we talked about, the societal pressure.
This one is absolutely essential for your mental well-being. Stop comparing your finances to social media.
Oh, that's a big one.
It is. The external pressure from those curated online lives just makes the anxiety worse. Your financial approach needs to be ruthlessly focused on your reality, your essential costs, and your path to stable earning. It has to be completely divorced from what you see online.
These 6 steps really do shift the focus. They arm you with the tools to name the problem, the creeping cost of existing, and then apply targeted solutions.
It moves you from feeling like a victim of circumstance to being the strategic manager of your own financial foundation.
The narrative shifts from, I'm bad at this, to, I am strategically managing rising structural costs.
That is the power of knowledge from these sources.
Which brings us back to our summary. Life got more expensive quietly, but awareness of this transformation, knowing where the squeeze is happening in housing, food, and utilities, that gives you power.
Understanding the mechanisms is step 1. It lets you stop fighting phantoms and start dealing with the quantifiable reality of how your money is losing power. And this awareness, it raises a critical, final question for you to consider.
All right, lay it on us.
If the cost of existing continues to silently increase, how might viewing essential spending like stable housing and reliable utilities as an investment in stability, rather than just a fixed cost to endure, fundamentally change the way you approach your long-term career or even your geographic location decisions? If the foundational overhead of life is the true enemy, maybe the most strategic financial decision you can make is investing your time, skills, or capital into securing that foundation, making stability itself the ultimate high-value asset in your portfolio.